Great to see you here. Now we're talking about lesson 6 and managing a project in 10 steps, and this is the first part of the presentations. So basically here we're going to look at how can we set up a process in 10 steps that will provide us with all the necessary information, but it's also very important to see what is not included in these 10 steps. Let's have a look at the content of the lesson. So we look at the project management process like we've seen before. We identify what are the main deliverables of those different process management steps. And we also link the knowledge areas as they are defined in PMI. And then we go to the 10 steps and we see what every phase, every project step that we are doing, like initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, control, and closing, how they link to those 10 steps and what are the things that we are doing. Like I said before, there are some items which are not included, but they are still important to understand. So I'll give you a quick review of quality, communications, procurement, and stakeholder management. Now, we talk a little bit about communication, but just the basics. We talk a little bit about stakeholders. But basically there is a lot more to do related to stakeholders. We also have a discussion forum like in every lesson, and of course there is an end of lesson multiple choice quiz, and this is lesson 7. In the next lesson there will be a more complete quiz about the 6 first lessons of this course. What are you going to learn here? Well, you will be able to describe the project management process and the 10 steps, link the 10 steps to the project management process, paraphrase the PMI knowledge areas, identify the relationship between the knowledge areas and the 10 steps, and summarize the knowledge areas that are not included in the 10 steps, and explain how the 10 steps will help you to complete projects successfully. Let's have a look at the main deliverables of the process. So we have the classical project management process, which is initiation, planning, execution, closing, and of course we have monitor and control here. The first thing is with initiation, we have the charter. So the initiation step is basically about creating the charter and identifying, let's say, the key stakeholders. Planning is about creating the project management plan. Here we are going to identify what are the activities, how do we plan those activities. We look at the budget, we look at resources, we look at risk management. All these things are basically elements that are part of the project management plan. Of course, we have the execution where we are creating the deliverables. Here we are doing the work, and every activity or work package has a deliverable. So here we will be creating those deliverables. And basically we will find what those deliverables are. And it's very important to understand because here we also have to monitor and control them. So once we have a deliverable, we have to see, are we following the baselines? Are we on time? Are we within cost? But also we have to say, do we create the deliverables in the way that we did it before? Now let's have a look at these other elements that we have. We look at closing. Closing is also very important. Here we look at knowledge and we look at lessons learned. There are more things to do in closing. Closing is a very important step in the project management process because here we are going to store all the information that we have learned before, and we are going to put it in a database where people can access it. So basically these are the things that are typically done in the area of the PMO, where you have all that information about the project. But it's even more important because you will understand what was the final conclusion of the project, what were the final plans, how did we realize what we did before, what is exactly the end product. Of course, the end product has to comply with the scope that we have the things realized what we want to have. We want to have everything like it was defined, but there may be difference in execution, different types of machines used, there may be updates. So we have to specify all these elements when later we want to upgrade, we want to change something, or we want to resolve a problem. We have to know, we have to understand what's happening here, what are the things that have really been implemented. When we look at the 10 knowledge areas, you see them here: integration, scope, scheduling, cost, quality, resources, communication, risk, procurement, and stakeholders. One element before, they were talking about human resources. Today we talk about resources because they can be human, but also material resources. It's very clear in the example: when you have a pilot, you have the person, but still till today, the pilot needs an airplane to fly, otherwise it doesn't work. Now these are linked to the process groups like initiation, planning, execution, monitor, and control, and closing. And they're also linked to the project life cycle. So we start with the project, we organize and prepare it, we carry out the work, and we end the project. So basically we have starting is about the initiation, organizing and preparing is about planning, carrying out the work is about execution and monitoring and control, and ending the project is about closing. We can also distinguish different life cycles, and the first life cycle is the project management life cycle. And the project management life cycle is in fact the step-by-step approach of application of the project management process steps. So the first one is initiating the project. We do the planning, is the next step in the project management life cycle. We have the execution, we are creating the deliverables. We have the monitoring, controlling. We have to see that everything is done the way we planned, that all the deliverables have the specifications that we need, and so on. So a lot of elements that come together here. And the final element of the project management life cycle is the closing, a very important step that we should never forget. The project only ends, or the project phase only ends, when closing has been completed. We also have another life cycle, which is the project life cycle. This is related to the different project phases, like the pre-build, what we have here. Here we take care of all the preparations necessary to start with the building process. We have the design process. Here we have the plans that we draw. We determine the construction elements and other elements that we have here. And finally, we have the build, actually build the infrastructure. So basically, these are the three elements, the three phases of the project life cycle. Now, when we look at the project management process, you see here a very complicated drawing. Basically, we have three elements here. We have the process groups, the initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, control. Those are represented by the red arrows. We see on the top, on the middle left, we see the initiation. Then we see execution, monitoring, control. And at the right-hand side, we see the closing. And below, we see all the monitor and control processes. So basically, all these elements are there. And we also have to look at the knowledge areas. When you look at these different elements, you see all the different processes that are linked to specific knowledge areas, and that are linked to a specific process group. So basically, we find all these links. There is a picture in one of the presentations, in the other presentations, where you can find all these elements together. Now, we also have to link the groups and the knowledge areas, because we have to find out how are the things going. Now, it's not the goal to talk about PMI, but it's important to understand how the principle of the PMI works and how you are doing these things. And it will also help you to identify what we are doing basically during those 10 steps. Now, when you see there a process with some dotted circle around, this is what we call the integration processes. And we will talk about that later, because those integration processes, basically, they don't do anything specific, but all the other processes that are around are in fact the processes that will be integrated. For example, to create a project charter, will be integrated to create a project management plan, and so on. But let's have a look at the PMBOK. What's in the PMBOK? and what are the different chapters in that document. What we are not going to talk about so much, basically we did as in the previous presentations, we talked about the introduction, we talked about the project environment, we talked about the role of the project manager, and basically from chapter 4 till chapter 13, we have the different knowledge areas. We start with integration management, scope management, schedule management, cost management, quality management, resource management, communication management, risk management, procurement, and finally stakeholder management. Now these are in a certain order because this is the order that we are going to integrate them in the 10 steps and how we're going to use them in the project. Now those knowledge areas contain processes that will be done during initiation. There will be processes which will be done in planning, in execution, monitoring, control, and closing. So all the processes for scope management, everything related to scope management, has all those different processes that we're going to use in the different project management process steps. Let's first have a look at integration. And integration is a little bit special. It's bringing things together. And the first one is develop the project charter. Here we bring all the elements together. What are the processes we need to create the project charter? What are the tools we need to create that? One of the main elements here are the identification of the key stakeholders. We also see here how to create the charter. There will be a charter when we look at the respective presentation. There will be a charter model that you can use. Then we look at the development of the project management plan. Here we have all the processes combined to create that plan. So here we see all the links between the processes. Then we look at direct and manage project work. Monitor and control the project work. Perform integrated change control and close project or phase. And we see there is a new one, manage project and knowledge. And those integration management processes are in fact linked to a specific process step. Develop the charter is linked to initiation. Develop the plan is linked to planning. Direct and manage the project work and manage the project knowledge is related to execution. Monitor and control project work and perform integrated change control are linked to monitoring control. And finally, close project or phase is linked to the closing step. So you see the link between the things that we're going to do, and you will be able to identify what we're going to do. First, we start with scope. We always start with a plan, scope management, plan, schedule management, things like that, because here we are going to define what are the principles, what are we going to use. So basically, we have to look at all the things. How will we deal with those processes? How will we collect the requirements? What are the forms we're using? What are the principles to defining the scope? The principles to create the work breakdown structure, yes, not schedule, structure. So we have to validate the scope, we have to control the scope. So these are all the elements that we have to do here, and these are the processes that relate to scope. So we know that when we're in planning, we have to collect the requirements, we have to define the scope, we have to create the WBS. And then we have to validate and control. We have to see that the scope is correct, and we have to control that everything is okay, which is part of monitoring and controlling. And these are the principles that we always see in all those presentations. When we look at schedule management, again, the same principle. Here we look at everything related to schedule, define activities, sequence activities, the duration of the activities. We have to develop the schedule. That's all in planning. And in monitoring, controlling, we have to control the schedule. We have to see what's happening to our schedule. Then we go through cost. We have all those elements finished. We have the schedule. Now we can plan the cost management. We can say what are the principles that we are going to use. And you can use that for your entire company, and you can adjust it for the specifics of this specific project. We look at estimating the cost, determining the budget, very important, and then controlling. And here we also have elements about earned value management. We will talk about, we already mentioned something about earned value management, but we're going to talk about it later on also. Chapter 8 is about quality. Here we have the different steps about quality. Quality is about prevention. We want to provide something that we promised. We don't want to provide too much because that's also not good. We have to really define what is necessary for the customer. We will look at this a little bit later because it's not really part of this course as such, but it's important to understand that quality is important, that there are a number of elements related to quality management that you have to deal with. We look at the resources. Well, we look at resources in the sense we have to estimate the resources, and we also look at some other chapters because we have to see that how long will the activities take. Basically, that's the only part in the planning, and then we acquire resources, develop the team, which is basically during execution, including the managing of the team, and control resources. So this is very important. We look at this when we're linking resources to the Gantt chart to see how the things are working. We also have communication management. Now, communication is very important. We have to see that communication is basically 90% of the time of the project manager. 90% of the time that the project manager is spending is typically based on communications. And it's communication internal with the team, external. You may have to adjust the way you communicate with the CFO, with the CTO, with the people in the company. You are in fact in one way in the communication itself using those soft skills, but on the other hand, when you look at the communication management itself, it's about the technologies they're using, it's about the rules that you are using. But we also talk a little bit about sending a message. What are the problems with sending a message when we have too many people, crash point, things like that? How does all this come together with a project? Well, risk management, we have to manage a risk. We will be looking into that in detail. It's very clear. This is one of the last steps in planning when we look at the 10-step process, because we can look at the risk at the end when we know everything about a project. Now, every step we're doing, we always have these other steps in mind. And while we're going through the project, while we're looking at the requirements, at the scope, at the scheduling, we will also identify the elements that may lead to risks. And at the end, we will bring them together, we will evaluate, and we may go back through the cycle to start these things again. Now, some people say, yeah, it's always this element that we are doing. This is one of the disadvantages of the waterfall method. We are going to look at them, we are going to deal with it, we have to go back. We want to do everything at the, let's say, before we start with the project. In the agile method, it's done in a different way. We do it step by step. We look at the risks of the different steps, and we don't need to go back so many times. We can start a lot faster, and in waterfall it becomes a little bit more complex. Now, risk management, we will talk about that later too. There are a lot of companies who just don't take risk seriously. However, it can be very important, as I will talk later about some cases that I have met personally. Procurement management is also not included in the 10 steps, but I will come back to it later. It's about buying things, and it's typically done by the procurement division, and the procurement division is typically out of the hands of the project manager. And that may lead to the fact that the project manager is not so acquainted with this, with the contracting. All these elements are very important to understand that there are things that you may encounter about procurement management. Unfortunately, in the 10 steps, I did not include it, but like I said, it's a simple way to go through a project. I said from the beginning that it's not a complete process which includes everything. And it's typically very usable for smaller projects. And we will talk about tailoring later also, because tailoring means that you're going to adjust all the things that we are doing here related to project management to the size of the project. Now let's have a look at the last element in the knowledge area, is stakeholders management. It has been added to it. It's it's linked to communications. We have the identification of the stakeholders, what we do in initiation when we make the charter. We also have the principles, how to deal with the stakeholders, and we have to manage and monitor them during the execution. There are a lot of processes we have to do. One of the things that comes very handy when you're looking at stakeholders is to identify who they are, what their interest is, where do you want them to be. All these things are done in stakeholder management. So that was the first part of lesson 7. We will continue with the second part after this video. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye bye.